All right, so I don't know if it's just me, but I've noticed this new kind of meta-narrative trend that's been emerging over the past few years. It first started with the Evangelion Rebuild series, which we're going to talk about more in a minute. But with those movies, if you aren't really aware, is kind of a retelling and a reinterpretation of the original anime series. So you have the creator of the original taking a lot of the same beats, a lot of the same plot points and themes, but just retelling it from a different point of view. And then it kind of started to pick up steam. I mean, we have the Across the Spider-Verse movies. We have, well, not quite the same. I think Everything Everywhere All at Once is also kind of a good intro into these types of stories. And then we also have a lot more recent examples like Scott Pilgrim Takes Off and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which I haven't played yet, but I at least did a little bit of research for this, so there's going to be thematic spoilers throughout this video. So just be warned in that. I'm going to try to remember to put in a warning at the beginning as well. But yeah, can we also admit now as a society that maybe George Lucas was kind of right? In my opinion, the prequels have become so much better. It's kind of a recontextualization of a lot of the original story. That whole, it's like poetry, it rhymes. I just think that that idea becomes more and more realized as we kind of start doing these meta narrative examinations of different stories that have, for better or worse, have aged maybe not as well as we thought. So in this video, we're going to talk about Eva, the Rebuild series. We're going to talk about Scott Pilgrim, and we're going to talk about Final Fantasy VII Remake. And we're going to kind of talk about how I think that these different series in their own special way kind of influenced each other with the way that they handled nostalgic stories, reinterpreting them, but still kind of just holding on to the core spirit of the story or the main message or theme or what have you. Like I said at the beginning, I called this a trend. I think it's going to be kind of the next thing for a little bit in certain spaces. It's, to me, a way for people to essentially cash in on nostalgia, but at the very least they're doing something different with it. They're at least kind of taking the story apart, putting it back together, and while things may be, different, it's like poetry. It rhymes. Shinji is the key to all this. All right, so right off the bat, little super duper quick mini review. I absolutely loved the Rebuild series. I think it did a fantastic job of doing what it was trying to do, which was actually trying to provide a sense of closure, not just for the characters, but for the entire series and world as a whole. Big spoilers, there's no more stories to really tell because I got rid of all of the Evangelion. So yeah, fine. I'm actually cool with that. And also to follow up, I think that the reason that it got so many mixed and harsh reviews during the initial theatrical releases was because of the fact that you couldn't sit down and just take it all in at once. I watched all 4 movies over the course of a couple days, and even with me taking breaks overnight or whatever, it was basically just one giant multi-hour long episode of Eva for me, and it was really good. And I went into this a little bit on my TikTok because that's where I like to kind of spitball a lot of ideas and thoughts before I start doing a video, so follow me on TikTok. But fuck Gendo. All my homies hate Gendo, and when we see that old man, we stomp him in the nuts. What I said in my TikTok, and kind of the main thing with Gendo, I wanted Gendo to have a redemption arc, but by the end of the last movie, by the end of 3+1, while he's technically happy, I didn't want him to have his happiness like that. I wanted him to actually realize, maybe even a little bit sooner, that he was a terrible father, and to actually do something in regards to sacrificing himself for Shinji and the greater world. I mean, to me, that would have been a really nice redemption. But in the end, he basically still got what he wanted. He ended, the impact or whatever. He still got to be with Yui, and in that, used himself and Yui to do the whole stopping of the human instrumentality. But man, I I wanted him to actually earn it more. I wanted him to go through more shit. I wanted him to fucking suffer a little bit more, as opposed to him, you know, reaching this higher level of being and being like, oh God, I've been a bad father the whole time. And especially me as like a father of 4 kids, I will sit there and think about the times where I like snap at my kids in the morning because I'm just now waking up and like, you know, one of them made a fucking mess in the kitchen. And like, I'll snap at my kids about that because, you know, I'm human. And even then, like hours later, I will still feel terrible and want to tell my kids, you know, hey, I'm sorry for snapping at you like that. So yeah, it really pissed me off to see Gendo still kind of getting his cake and eating it too. I didn't mean for this tangent to really go off, but yes, I'm still swirling in my head about Eva because it was good. So right off the bat, if you're not familiar with Neon Genesis Evangelion, go watch it already. The entire TV series and the concluding movies are available on Netflix. They're also on the Internet Archive, because I mean, there might or might not be a link below. But if you must, the Rebuild series is also on Prime Video if you have a sub for that. There's also like 37 different timelines that are all considered canon, but I mean, that literally is the whole point of human instrumentality. Neon Genesis Evangelion, more commonly known as Eva, stands as a cornerstone of Japanese animation, which has been captivating audiences with a blend of mechanized action, psychological drama, and some really serious and deeper than you realize themes. And there is some mech human body horror. So, set in a near dystopian future, the series follows a teenager named Shinji Ikari as he pilots giant biomachines known as Evangelions to combat a whole bunch of otherworldly beings known as angels. However, beneath the surface of this sci-fi trappings, Evangelion dives into the complexities of human relationships, the nature of identity, and the struggle for self-acceptance in a world that is literally collapsing before our eyes. Eva's impact, on Japanese media, particularly during the late 90s and early 2000s, really cannot be overstated. The series broke new ground with its very introspective storytelling and psychological depth, which influenced a generation of creators from across various mediums. From its innovative narrative structure to its exploration of existential themes, this anime in a lot of ways was a lot of people's first introduction into a more meta-narrative storytelling story. Going into the series, you are completely expecting a fun but tense cartoon, a bunch of kids fighting a bunch of aliens and a bunch of robots, and then as you start learning more and more about the world, as you start learning how this world functions and why it functions the way that it does, it just slowly becomes more and more horrific and terrifying and messed up. And then you add in the familiar relationships, like Gendo essentially only using his son to bring about human instrumentality and all that. There's a lot that can really be said in the nature of generational trauma, parenthood as a child. What do you owe your parents who brought you into this world? The reason that I'm sitting here debating on whether or not to make this video like its own video. One notable area where Eva left its mark is in the area of video games, which really makes sense. You know, real recognize real, nerd recognize nerd. I think this is most prevalent in a lot of the Japanese RPGs that came out after Eva's premiere. So I'm talking about games like Final Fantasy VII OG and Xenogears. They drew a lot of very obvious inspiration from Eva's tone and approach. It ushered in an era of JRPGs that tried to explore more deeper and complex themes and characters with nuance and depth and justifiable villains and tragic heroes. This influence is really evident in the brooding atmosphere and multifaceted characters that define many iconic titles of the era. If you ever wondered why JRPGs of the PS1 era suddenly became more darker, introspective, and a little bit grittier, Evangelion deserves a good chunk of the credit and blame. Despite his popularity, Eva never really had what people would call a satisfactory ending. The original series failed to resolve the intricate plot with its theological and ontological overtones. Shortly before Eva aired in Japan, Ono wrote that he had created it after 4 years of severe depression when he was, quote-unquote, a wreck unable to do anything, and that the story had not yet ended in my mind. Furthermore, he stated, "I don't know what will become of Shinji or the other characters or where they'll go." Ono was clearly not satisfied as he continued to look for a conclusion for this story, recutting the last episodes and reworking them into the feature Death and Rebirth, which came out in 1997. And he tried this again with the second 1997 feature, End of Evangelion, which probably has one of the most horrifying final scenes that I can ever think of. Everyone turning into orange soda. No. So over the years, fueled by a desire for a more satisfactory conclusion and also fueled by the weird Eva fans who would not leave him alone and get off his back, he embarked on a journey to reimagine the series as a whole. This was dubbed the Rebuild of Evangelion project, and it serves as a testament to the enduring legacy of the original series as well, at least in my opinion. The rebuild films themselves reimagine the story with a very fresh perspective, and it offers new insights into its characters and themes. The rebuild films aren't just remakes, they're reflections of Ono's personal growth and evolving perspective. Through them, he explores deeper themes, grapples with his own personal inner demons, and ultimately finds a sense of closure, a journey that is mirrored in Shinji's quest for not only self-acceptance, but outward acceptance as well. And without getting into the whole nitty-gritty hard side of it, these rebuild films are technically a continuation of the series and the movies. So that means that you watch the anime series, you watch the movies, and then Rebuild is essentially a restart, a reboot of that entire timeline with a couple different factors that end up changing everything. Ono stated, 25 years ago, when I first created Evangelion, the world was a different place, and I was a different person. Or I've changed since that time. The way I described things was more focused on the inner self and describing the inner world. Right now, I think it's time to focus on how I describe the outer world. The theme hasn't changed, but how I describe the theme has changed. Now, to me, this essentially feels like a reinterpretation of the depression that he first channeled into Eva with a renewed perspective, which I mean is a big deal because that's a major part of why so many people grew so attached to the original show. It was one of the first times that they felt like somebody was speaking to them in a way that made sense. There aren't many pieces of pop culture that take such an abstract yet accurate look at severe depression and anxiety, much less one that is an anime, let's be honest. So with that, Rebuild isn't Hideki Anno changing his mind about how he felt, he's only changing his point of view in relation to those feelings. So think about it like, if the original series comes from the first-person view of someone in the midst of depression, then Rebuild comes from the third-person perspective of someone who has not only recovered from that state of mind, but have also grown from it as well. This one simple difference changes how the two versions of Eva treat their characters. Rebuild allows them to make their own mistakes, while the original series frames the world around them as completely harsh and unforgiving. When viewed in parallel and concurrently, based on which timeline you're in, these two versions of Eva reveal a very powerful real-life story about a man coming to terms with his emotional past and using that to build himself a better future. When watching the first two movies, you're constantly filled with tension and feelings of dread and a weird messed up sense of deja vu. Because you're watching these characters repeat the same habits and the same heartbreak with slight but noticeable deviations. And these changes become larger and larger until we are quite literally in a whole new story and quite blatantly in a whole new timeline. And this new timeline culminates in a almost 30-year confrontation and eventual reconciliation between father and son. While the Rebuild films continue the cycle of instrumentality in an overarching sense, By rebuilding the story of Eva, they also confront repetitive character cycles within the series itself and across all different iterations and mediums that the story takes place in. These movies are the final part of an infinite time loop where Shinji attempts to break free from his emotional solitude, but is constantly rewarded with pain and alienation along the way. Like, seriously, the first 3 movies, I am sitting here like, this dude just keeps getting beat down by life. One scene that feels like it's completely just trying to yell at you, the whole point of this entire rebuild, is the scene between Shinji and a now grown-up Toji. I feel like Toji becomes a reflection of not only what the world is fighting for, a chance to lead a normal existence that is filled with, love, compassion, and community, but everything that Shinji had lost in that 15-year time gap, and living out version after version of this same story in which fear and indecision cause harm and keep him literally trapped in his teenage body and mind. He's lost time, he's lost love, he's lost happiness, which cannot help but also read as a self-criticism of Anno's nearly 3 decades long involvement with this one IP. And it almost feels like a commentary of how you feel after coming out of a depressive episode and seeing yourself repeating the same time loop over and over again with just slight deviations. Like the much slower pace and the whole slice of life stuff. It's so good. So in the third and penultimate film of the series, Thrice Upon a Time, we start to see a version of a story in which Shinji's and Gendo's relationship is more than just a blueprint of how to not be a father, and becomes more than just him abusing his kid because of his weird Freudian obsession with his daughter wife. The film's climax involves Shinji and Gendo and their respective Eva units, both variations of Eva Unit 1, hurtling themselves into a weird, abstract realm in which their respective memories and traumas become as potent as any of the weapons that they end up wielding. Only way that Shinji can really escape the next cycle of just repeating the same clash over and over and over again is by ending it before it begins. By making sure the next version of the world exists without Evas, though without erasing the history of the past and all of the hardships and everything that they had learned in that time. Now, as he lays out this plan to Rei, footage from previous versions of the story is projected onto them, as if to collapse each iteration into one, and making all of it canon and making it all one timeline. And it captures the myriad of internal challenges these characters have faced before, and this is before they even finish high school. Each avatar may have existed in different universes, but to us, the viewers and the metatextual gods of this story, us, the combined versions of Shinji, Asuka, and Rei, and even Gendo have all been essentially the same person. They have all symbolized the daunting and the often lifelong war with the angels that we call self-acceptance and self-love. Like all wars, it is won with many battles and many failures, but ultimately a slow and painful and grueling transition towards triumph. At the end of this series, the cycle ends for good, not because of the pain of the characters no longer exist, but because the pain no longer takes this all-encompassing physical form that forces them to return to this same series of events over and over and over again until the heat death of the universe. To bring back Anno, he said, "In the previous films, Shinji was only able to save himself. But in the fourth film, he grows, becomes more mature, and has the room to save and care for those very close to him." Despite the rebuilds not providing any additional depth to the character's psyche, to me the movie provides a really cathartic release of the many issues and the many traumas that the characters had suffered from. Looking at the Evangelion rebuilds as a metatextual work instead of an attempt to make the series more accessible, it makes a lot of the shortcomings of the movies a lot more easier for me to kind of swallow. The rebuilds were never meant to be a retelling of the Neon Genesis Evangelion, but instead it was a medium for commentating on the original series itself. And I have a feeling as we move forward in time, especially with the next two stories we'll be talking about, you'll see where I'm coming from. Like the characters, Ano is finally able to look beyond the boundaries of this story and of the genre which he has been immersed in for more than 25 years. All it took was going back to the beginning and staying there long enough that all of Shinji's torment and trauma finally materializes into something that he can embrace and something that he can finally deal with and something he can finally just move on from. By breaking apart the boundaries between the many versions of this story and between characters like Shinji and Gendo, Ano triggers an instrumentality of his own. A kinder version born not out of fear, but of self-acceptance and understanding. Evangelion's physical scale may be that of a literal biblical epic, but its emotional story has always been about ways to survive the mundane, everyday sorrows that end up hitting us the hardest. The kind that even shattering grief turns into after a while. The inevitable, numbing, silent suffering which people are just expected to repress. After Shinji is finally embraced by his father, he says the one line that this is the series.
I'm fine. I think I can handle pain and heartbreak.
And like, even me just saying that gives me the feels. Because that's like the hardest thing to really learn in life, is being able to handle the pain and the heartbreak. And sorry, I'm like going into emotional dad mode. So, Scott Pilgrim, let's take off. Very similar to the Ava series, Scott Pilgrim Takes Off was author Brian Lee O'Malley's foray into revisiting his own acclaimed series and using animation and in the television format as a way to revisit, recontextualize, and just kind of reapproach his thoughts about this story that became just the finest of wine in terms of like pop culture. O'Malley's reflections on his characters and their journeys really underscore a profound shift in this new perspective. It's a maturation that allows him to explore deeper themes and offer alternative outcomes. Like Ano, O'Malley uses his remake as a canvas for introspection and growth, which is challenging both himself and his audience to reconsider the familiar narratives through a more experienced and older lens. In the spirit of the comics, Scott Pilgrim Takes Off is very much full of loving nods and references to the pop culture that inspired it, not just back then, but even now. Anime fans will very quickly and obviously pick up on all the references to Ava and other nerdy pop culture works, but I think that the one thing that is going to be also quite obvious in regards to its execution is how it very much has the same vibe as the Rebuild teratology of films. So while doing a bit of an interview tour for the Takes Off series, O'Malley described the series as very peak high school for him. He noted that there are some similarities with the Rebuild films and pointing out that both are instances of a creator returning to a work and, to quote, shaking things up knowing that the other version still exists. O'Malley also noted, the rebuilds just ended up being a really easy way for us to explain what we were doing. So now when I tell people what I'm doing, I could just say it's a Scott Pilgrim rebuild. But was that our intention when we did our outlines? No, but it's a very similar thing. And in this story, yeah, I mean, the titular hero, Scott Pilgrim, he takes off. He's gone for pretty much most of the whole series, the first season. And it renders his love interest, Ramona Flowers, to be the hero of the day. Not only does she have to go full Sherlock mode, but during this journey, she's gonna have to confront her evil exes and kind of come to terms with the fact that maybe she hurt them as well. Although the series is packed with a lot of its signature action sequences and references, I mean, they even kind of repeat a lot of the same battles from the movie, but just with different characters. The easiest one that I could think of would be Wallace's fight with all the stunt doubles, and that was with Julie? I can't remember. I'll edit it in. But yeah, that's a very blatant example of basically repurposing that same movie set fight, but doing it with different characters, recontextualized in different ways. I'm gonna bring back in some O'Malley quotes here. For the past 2 years, I've known that I'm doing something a little wild with my beloved characters. I think that part of that is just getting older, and part of that is just the way our culture has really evolved. In the 2000s, it just felt very funny to me to have a guy fight through all of his emotional problems, but we also kind of look at that as a kind of immature outlook now. And so with this added level of diplomacy, this gives Ramona a chance to actually talk out her issues and her problems and her traumas with her exes, as opposed to literally fighting over it. So we're kind of in another saturation of live action remakes of like animated IPs. And I mean, it's not necessarily the worst thing, but I think that Scott Pilgrim kind of operates as an outlier in this recent trend. It's an animated retelling that succeeds the live action version as opposed to the other way around. And because in its own meta way, the live action version existed, it's remixing and subverting the main story, which allows the creative team to go back and fix some of the issues with the original work. Or at the very least, give those problems a really good post-mortem, which allows them to show how and why they missed the mark on something. One example is after spending most of the source material and movie being a stalkery and combative Scottaholic, Knives Chow gets to really exist outside of infatuation without necessarily erasing her pain over Scott's betrayal. As O'Malley stated, we really wanted to give Knives a world that was not about boys. She really comes into her own. She finds her own joys and passions. And while all of that was a result of her being hurt by Scott, she found new friends. She started a band. She got a deal. O'Malley said that it was nice to be able to have a fresh start with Ramona. It also provides a chance to reimagine the cast of characters and gives them a bit of a chance to really mature. O'Malley stated this approach with, hopefully I'm a tiny bit older, wiser, and have more objectivity. With the evil exes in particular, I mostly treated them as a joke in the original series, but now I have enough maturity to see different sides of them and find some empathy. It was nice to finally give more of Ramona's backstory with Roxy and the twins, which I always intended for the books, but I ended up not using it at the time. And it was also fun to use Robot 01. And yeah, that was probably the one episode that like really threw me off in terms of, oh, this is gonna be different, was the episode with Ramona and Roxy and them hashing stuff out. I mean, not only was that battle absolutely cool, but the conclusion itself, yeah, choice, good work. What was a contemporary story 20 years ago is now a 2000s era period piece. As a millennial, I'm still processing the phenomenon of 2000s nostalgia now becoming a thing, especially because Scott Pilgrim itself is already playing on that same nostalgia for like not that much more in time, with the earlier decades with a lot of references to retro video games and things like that. But I think that this nostalgia play is a lot more preferable to me to modernize the setting of Scott Pilgrim, and it's more than just nostalgia. If the comic captured the experience of being a clueless young adult, Scott Pilgrim allows for greater reflection on the experience from the perspective of someone older and maybe a tiny bit less clueless. It's like being able to go and change the past without actually changing the past. It's the ability to take all the stuff that you went through in your life, kind of go back in time and be like, let's just smooth this out a little bit. We're going to keep the same beats, but we're just going to change a couple of the details. And then we have the guy who made Kingdom Hearts, Tetsuya Nomura. Final Fantasy VII Remake. I don't have a PlayStation 5. I keep asking Sony to send me one so I can talk about their games more. That hasn't happened yet, so get at me, Sony. But I have played Final Fantasy VII Remake and Intergrade, and I am patiently waiting for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth to come out on PC. I will say I did spoil myself a tiny bit in regards to wanting to have a bit more of an idea about where the ending was going to take the third game, so there will be thematic spoilers, but I mean, if you are even slightly familiar with Tetsuya Nomura, then it's not going to be any surprise at all. you know that there's going to be timey-wimey shenanigans in there. So yeah, Mad Lad and Time Crystal addict Tetsuya Nomura and his team embraced the opportunity to really delve deeper into the beloved world of Final Fantasy VII, while also being able to have a chance to really address some of the criticisms and complexities that have emerged over the years, especially with the different games and timelines and things like that that have come out to really milk that one game dry. Like Anno and O'Malley, Nomura's team aim not just to retell the story, but to really dissect its themes and characters from a really fresh angle. One notable example of this would be the approach and treatment of Yuffie. Unlike in the original game where Yuffie's inclusion in the party was optional, the remake allows for a deeper exploration of Yuffie and her personality, her history, and the hidden emotions behind her cheerful demeanor and her weird obsession of being the most powerful magic user of all time. I think that's gonna go somewhere. Probably not. By incorporating events from Midgar into Yuffie's journey as a materia hunter, creators were able to provide insight into her character's development, which set the stage for her greater introduction in the second game, I'm assuming. Moreover, Nomura emphasized that Final Fantasy VII Remake is not just a retread of the original game, but a culmination of over 2 decades of storytelling within the Final Fantasy VII universe. Project aims to integrate various elements from the expanded universe, including spin-off titles and supplementary materials, to create a cohesive and immersive experience for both longtime fans and newcomers alike. He's making everything canon. That is exactly what that means. He's smushing all these timelines into one. I'm sorry if that's a spoiler, but I mean, come on. I will say though that this approach reflects a deeper understanding of the significance of nostalgia, while also acknowledging the need for innovation and evolution within storytelling itself, especially in a medium like gaming that has just rapidly grown exponentially so quickly, and every couple years we are just getting more and more and more in terms of what we're able to output. Parallels between Final Fantasy VII Remake and the other postmodern rebuilds such as Ava and Scott Pilgrim, it all becomes very increasingly apparent in my opinion. That's why I wrote this freaking video. All these projects really imagine iconic narratives from the past, deviating from the original canon just to explore new themes and new perspectives. Just as the Ava films diverge from the source material to offer a fresh interpretation of the series, Final Fantasy VII Remake introduces alternate timelines and multiversal concepts to expand the scope of its narrative. And the little bit that I know about Rebirth came from the skill up review of the game, and especially knowing that like Barrett gets a lot more screen time, he gets a lot more depth in his personality, it goes into his history. For me, that's pretty awesome. And it's awesome in multiple ways, because first off, I'm gonna say the thing, having good black representative fathers in gaming is very important. If that somehow pisses you off, bye. I'm glad you at least made it this far. And second off, Barrett deserves more, because he was always best boy. So yeah, Sony, if you're watching this, send me a PlayStation 5, maybe, wait, Iris. Sony, if you're watching this, send me a PlayStation 5 and I will talk about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth before it comes out on PC. Alright, so let's go ahead and wrap up, and I'm gonna go make my kids some lunch. What really ties these works together are the themes of reflection, reinvention, and self-awareness. To me, they're not just about nostalgia or fan service. They're about really grappling with the past, embracing change, and just finding catharsis through creative expression. Through these postmodern remakes, rebuilds, whatever, creators are able to really transcend the limitations of their original works, and it invites audiences to join them on a journey of rediscovery and reevaluation. And this is something that I always found very interesting from the perspective as a creative. Up until recently, there was always very much like, once you put it out there, you can't go back and touch it. You just learn from it and move on. But now we're at a point where we have the ability and the technology to kind of go back and say, well, you know what? I'm gonna change this a little bit. I'm gonna make this a little bit better. Essentially, you know, pulling the whole Mass Effect thing by fixing the ending. And in some ways, I think that yes, it can be used as a cop-out, but just from a purely creative perspective, there's just so much potential for that. And I'm actually very interested and excited to see where it goes. These postmodern remakes and updates of older media really reflect on the modern nature of nostalgia right now by engaging with it in a more critical and introspective manner. Nostalgia is traditionally seen as longing for the past, but it has evolved in the modern age to really not just encompass a romanticized view of bygone eras, but also a deeper reflection on the media that has shaped us during our formative years. During adolescence, we are particularly susceptible to the influence of media. It becomes a lens through which we perceive the world and understand not just ourselves, but, you know, in a certain way, how we can try to understand others. However, as we mature and we begin to recognize the flaws and complexities inherent in the media that we once idolized, these postmodern rebuilds serve as a platform for us to seriously critique and criticize the media that once shaped our perception of the world. Through the rebuild films, Anno is able to confront the darker aspects of his creation and explore topics like depression, loneliness, and existential angst with a newfound sense of maturity and depth, and also addressing all the weird-ass old Ava fans. O'Malley himself was able to acknowledge the flaws and limitations of his earlier work, using the animated adaptation as a platform to address them and offer alternative outcomes. By doing so, he invites audiences to reevaluate their perceptions of the characters and themes, challenging them to see beyond the surface level nostalgia and engage with the material in a more critical manner. Like Lucas Lee losing his movie star job and happily becoming a barista, like that's growth. That is very substantial character growth that happened in like 5 episodes. The exploration of alternate timelines and the introduction of multiversal concepts in Final Fantasy VII Remake serves as a nod to this postmodern sensibilities of storytelling and just how much our technology in gaming has grown over 10, 20 years. This series is probably doing one of the bravest things that it can, and it is challenging the traditional notions of continuity and canon. By embracing the idea of multiple realities, the remake encourages audiences to really reconsider their relationship with the original game. But then, you know, Tetsuya Nomura, timey-wimey shenanigans, Doctor Who, I'm sure Mickey Mouse will show up at the end of this freaking third game. But yeah, moreover, I just think that these works serve as a really cool metatextual commentary on the nature of storytelling itself. They challenge the notion of definitive narratives, embracing ambiguity and multiplicity. By revisiting familiar tales from new perspectives, they remind us that art is fluid and subjective, a reflection of the ever-shifting landscapes of human experience. As a consumer of this type of media, I think that we can learn much from this trend of rebuilds or remakes or what have you. I think this new trend encourages us to approach familiar stories with fresh eyes, to question assumptions and embrace the transformative power of reinterpretation. And with that, let's go to the end card. All right, so thank you again for joining me on this video. Thank you times a million once again for all the support you have been showing me lately. Thank you, YouTube gods, for all the support that you have been giving me lately. I promise that I will start working on another kid that I can sacrifice to the machine gods and, you know, keep this train rolling. So yeah, I'd love to know what you guys thought. Love to know your feedback. Thank you again for all the support. We broke 420 subscribers, and I was lucky to get a screenshot of when it was 420. So that made me a happy boy. Yeah, so let me know what you think. Let me know if there's anything you want me to talk about in any aspect. I think that you guys are kind of starting to pick up the vibes I'm putting out. So if there's anything that you would like my perspective on, let me know. Just because I'm never running short of videos to make, but I want to I really want to start interacting with you guys more, which is what I'm trying to do. So yeah, do the socials, do all the YouTubey stuff, smash that like button, smash the subscribe button. Thank you again for your time. My kids are now yelling at me because I'm taking too long, so I'm gonna go. You guys have a great day, have a great week, and yeah, just be cool to each other.